Today's guest is the incredibly talented Billy Test, a Pennsylvania native and world-class pianist, composer, and educator. Holding the piano chair in the Grammy Award-winning WDR Big Band in Germany, Billy seamlessly blends the soul of jazz and blues with the harmonic depth of classical music. With performances at legendary venues like Carnegie Hall and the Village Vanguard, and compositions featured by the WDR Big Band, Billy's artistry is nothing short of inspiring. Join us as we dive into his journey, his creative process, and the daring improvisations that define his sound. So, joining us from Germany, Billy, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Abe. How's it going?
Everything's good. I'm not sure what time it is over there. It's 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
It's 10 o'clock at night, but that means it should be nice and quiet here. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, Billy,
yeah.
I came to know about you from, playing in New York with, I heard you playing with Michael Feinberg and his trio and
Hmm,
band.
yeah.
But now you're over in Germany and, you definitely had a big influence on the New York City music scene. I'm sure it's been a big adjustment, but now you're probably used to it, being over there. Can you talk about, how your lifestyle has changed, being a pianist in the States and then going over to Europe?
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's interesting because I've been here for about 6.5 years now, and I thought that by now I would be settled in. But there are still moments of culture shock. Even though, at a first glance, Germany versus the US, you wouldn't think necessarily that it's that radically different. But just culturally, it's been a big shift. I moved here in it was August 2018, and it was an interesting move because I had every intent of being a New Yorker for life. I was subbing in the Vanguard band a lot. I was, very happy playing with people like Michael Feinberg and um, was getting to play a bit with Dave Liebman. It was just sort of like everything was going in the direction that I wanted to. But that million-dollar question of like, well, what's this going to look like when I'm 50? Or what's this
Hmm.
going to look like when I'm 60? And I was kind of hitting that point of life that I needed to start making a little bit more of a plan about what's the long-term thing going to be. Um, Artistically and personally and just all the life stuff. And around that time, I just woke up one day with an email from John Goldsby, who just retired as the bassist in the WDR Big Band, saying, "Hey, I got your information from Jake Neely. How would you like to audition for the WDR Big Band?" And as someone who was writing a lot of large ensemble music and was in that world a lot, I was very aware of the WDR. And that started what ended up being like a year and a half process of coming over and playing projects and auditioning and going back and forth between New York and here. And um, I just came with an open mind. I thought if I come over and I like it, great. And if I come over and I don't like it, then I just tell them like, hey, thanks, but this is not for me. And I just kind of fell in love with the band. Um, it's it's completely different from anything. I think outside of the service bands, like if I was in the Army Blues, the Jazz Ambassadors, maybe it would be a similar thing. But we play 250 days a year. Now that's not necessarily concerts. Our normal work week is where everything is recorded. We're recording for radio. Sometimes it's on television. Sometimes it's live stream. But WDR stands for Westdeutsche Rundfunk, which is like West German radio. And it's kind of like you take NPR and PBS and smash them together, but every state in Germany has one. And the one here just happens to have a big band. Um, so I think my biggest fear when I moved here was that things were going to slow down, which
You mean in
in a way,
terms of your artistry or your progress, or like what do you
I
mean
think
by?
all of it. I think in terms of, I mean, one of the things that I loved about New York was that I mean, it's pretty fast paced, right? Um, you
One
could go
thing
to
to the
12.
next, one thing to the next, to the next.
Yeah, yeah, one thing to the next, and also just the sheer size of the scene. I think one thing, if I think back on what I took for granted in New York, like one thing that I feel a lot here there are good players. There are good players everywhere. But New York, it's like there are hundreds of just amazing bass players. There are hundreds of amazing drummers. You know, when you leave New York, that's something that I've missed a lot is that the numbers get a little thinner. You can still be in a big scene, but I think New York is probably the biggest scene in the world. It's
Totally.
just,
I mean, I
yeah.
was just in Paris last week, and I went
Oh,
to a
cool.
jazz club, and the music was amazing. Like I got chills for the first three songs. The
Hmm.
music is just as, tremendous. It just you're talking about the number of musicians there are but there is amazing players everywhere. So
Yeah. Yeah. So it's one of those things that if you get called for a gig far in advance, everybody's racing to get that one bass player or that one drummer or that kind of thing. That's something that's been a real cultural shift. Um, and when I moved here, I didn't speak any German, and now it's not always pretty, but I'm highly functional.
mhm.
Like I have friends here that I only speak German with, and that's been a big just, general cultural thing is just learning a new language and learning how to use that language when you're on a gig or whatever.
When people think about Germany and jazz these days, a big thing that happened in the probably in the earlier, mid 2000s was Kurt Rosenwinkel moved from New York to Germany.
Hmm.
Um, have you, I mean, two tremendous players like yourselves, have you guys ever crossed paths or anything in the being that you're both in the same
Not
country?
yet. I would really love to. I mean, I'd be crazy not to. But I'm on the other side of Germany.
Yeah, we
I
forget
haven't
how
had
big
the
Germany
opportunity yet.
is.
Yeah. I have Doug Weiss moved over here about the same time that I did. He's a really great bass player.
Oh yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and I've had the chance to play with him quite a bit since I've come over here.
Oh, great.
Yeah, there have also been a couple of opportunities that I've had moving here. I did a handful of tours with Alex Reel, and it was a bass player Martin Wynn's set of gigs. But Alex, he passed away last June. He was well into his 80s. But there are videos of him as a little kid playing with Bill Evans, like learning. If you know, like there's that video on YouTube of like Bill Evans teaching this young drummer his repertoire before a gig, and that's the guy. And just to be with somebody like that, I mean though there are elders that sort of establish themselves here just like they did in New York, and I kind of have. I don't know Kurt personally. I don't want to call Kurt an elder before his time, but um, Kurt has definitely established himself as like one of the rocks in the scene here and is very respected, which is just how it should be.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's it.
Yeah.
You said when you mentioned Martin Wynn, has there been like opportunities where players have come over, and you've gone to work with, with their working bands, in Germany, like as part of like just being a sideman with them, like that type of stuff?
Yeah. This year I've done a lot of gigs with the singer Curtis Stigers. Um, real he's kind of a chameleon. He has so many things that he does really well. But in his heart, he's always been a jazz singer and was kind of mentored by Gene Harris. And I think those opportunities definitely came because I was here.
Hmm.
Um, there have also been, because the WDR has a lot of guests come through,
Right, right.
and there have been a lot of moments that a guest comes through and you just automatically feel like, oh, we understand each other. I had a really beautiful chance. I think it was summer 2021. It might have been 2022. It all pandemic years all kind of meld together.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm
Uh,
like, I feel like you moved to Germany like much like sooner than say because it's just the pandemic.
yeah, those like 2, 3 years just kind of go.
Hmm.
But I had a really great chance. Rufus Reed did a project with the band here of his music, and he was playing bass at the same time. And I'd had a lot of, we just kind of hung out a lot the week that he was here and got the chance to sort of play some duo gigs with him.
Oh, wow.
And that was like really special. Just somebody that's on so many records that I listened to as a kid growing up and as an adult still. And he has this beat that's just like being hugged. It's just this beautiful thing. And Dennis McCrell, like there are a lot of people that I've gotten to know that I maybe knew a little bit in New York. But the beautiful thing about the band here is a lot of times a rehearsal for us, we rehearse 5, 6 hours, which sounds like a lot. But if you start rehearsal at 5, you're done at 3. And if you're a guest from out of town and you're in Cologne and you don't know what to do, it's like, what do you like to eat? Okay, let's go there.
Mhm.
So it's been really nice for the not to make it sound like I'm schmoozing, but it's been really nice for just the person part of like all these people that maybe you see or you play a gig with, and it's just like a handshake and hey, how's it going? And then you go home, but you never really get the chance to be like, what book did you read lately, or anything like that. So it kind of adds an extra level of depth to the humanity of it, and that's definitely been a real special part of having this job, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, the band is so reputable and has such this amazing reputation. The music is at such a high level. You're getting to play duo with Rufus Reed, getting to sit down and like just make these personal connections with these
Hmm.
players. It sounds like, artistically, you sound very, very fulfilled. Like, would that be the
Yeah.
case? Are you still like, are there still things right now you're like, oh, I wish I could do that, or you're like, you know what, I need just some space to just kind of chill right now and just cool
It's
down.
kind of both. I mean, there's a part that's still when the band has breaks, it's not uncommon for me to hop on an airplane and make sure I end up back in New York. Just because that's where so much is going, and I think New York is always going to feel like a home for me. Um, but there is a part that, I've had the space to practice in a way here that I didn't have in New York. Um, Also that thing of I'm an alum of William Patterson, and when I was there, all the teachers it was like you're working for a sideman job, and that was so much the conversation of like find somebody that you can go and you can play with 100 nights of the year. Um, but for our generation, I don't know anybody that's doing that. I mean,
Mm.
I mean, at one time I was curious and just kind of like looked at Branford Marsalis's calendar. And once you're at that level, he works when he wants to work and he doesn't work when he doesn't want to work. And so I don't know anybody that's necessarily looking to be away from home 100 days of the year like Miles was.
Yeah, I mean, some people like traveling. I mean, but people don't understand that you want to be rested to play the music well.
Mhm.
You don't want to be burnt out. When you go from place to place to place, it can feel, you know, you have to kind of stay in like a flow state. So how's life on the road for you in that sense? Have there been things that you've maybe had to start doing, like, or even things you have to practice a certain way, or like just
Yeah.
that? I
It's
mean, it's a different level when you're on the road.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's been interesting here because we're actually not on the road that much in the WDR. We're kind of like central to Cologne and we kind of pop out and do little things here and there.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, where I was going with what I said before is that this is what's been a real blessing with this band is playing with the same people. You get that kind of and start to understand of like, yeah, when you play with the same rhythm section 200 days of the year, a lot of stuff just starts to happen. That when I play with other rhythm sections, sometimes I miss. Um, but as far as like prepping for road stuff, it's interesting because I'm a pretty chronic practicer. Um, but sometimes I notice, I think the thing that I had to learn is to stop expecting things, which sounds kind of dark,
What do
maybe.
you mean by like of yourself, like of the
There,
music?
I think there are things where like you have a night that feels like this is the best night of the tour. Or you think like that venue with that piano in front of that audience, that's going to be the best night of the tour. Or last night was killing, and that means tonight is going to be more killing. Like all of those kinds of expectations. When I first got into this, I used to think all of those things.
Mm.
And realizing that walking on the stage thinking like, well, this is going to be better than last night is I'm kind of I don't know if I can curse. I'm kind of fucked before I start.
Yeah.
Um, because just that expectation level of it, where if I just walk out and say like, okay, I'm just going to do the best I can do, and you know, every audience is different, and you never know what went on in the town the day before, or um, in the it's funny the WDR when we do live broadcasts, a lot of times they'll play like a little snippet of the news because we go on right after the news. And this is a really kind of dark story. One of the first concerts I did here, we had driven way out in the middle of nowhere, and they released this news thing, and I didn't understand any of the German, but it was that, there had been a bus accident, like a school bus accident, but it was from kids in that town.
Oh, wow.
And like the audience was just like really weird. And it's like, why is the audience? It's like, well, of course the audience is going to be weird. Like, and those are the kinds of things that I think about a lot more is that it's the audience connection thing. Like, just because you think the audience should react a certain way doesn't mean that the audience is going to react that way. Like, I'm not God. I can't make them do what I want them to do. Like those kinds of things. I think when I was touring more, there was a lot of thought of like, well, why isn't this happening with the audience, or why is this happening? Or last night everybody felt really connected, and today it feels like we've never played together. It's just human stuff that we can't get too heartbroken about. And
You
that,
know, you make such a good point. It's like there's so many factors going into the performance, like from the audience, like each member individually can like when I was in Paris, I went to the jazz club, like I'm clear the jazz. I start applauding right away, like after the solo. Like
hmm
I start the, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
start the engine. I'm like, but you never, if I didn't start applauding some, you know what I mean? Maybe, so it's like
yeah,
even
yeah.
one person can change things. Like there's all the factors about how everyone's feeling in the band and stuff. And people,
hmm
is this person, did they get enough sleep? Or, did that person get a text message? How do my hands feel? Is it cold in here? Like a million things. So what you're saying, which I think is the beautiful part of it, is stop expecting and just go and do it. And whatever it
Yeah,
is, it is.
yeah. Because I also would set up, had a little digital recorder and would record things. And this was my New York lesson, was that there would be nights that I thought like, yeah, I played well. And I'd be listening on the subway on the way home and be like, this is awful. This is
Yeah.
some of the worst piano playing I've ever done. And then there would be nights that I think like, oh, I played so bad. That was horrible. Like I'm a terrible pianist. And then I put my headphones on and it'd be like, actually, that's some of the better piano playing that I did. And just learning that whole emotional response, it's just emotions. Um, and that so much of that determines the outlook of how people act on a tour, whether they get grumpy or whether they're easy to deal with, or that, so much of the interpersonal stuff is just chill. Like, don't expect things. Just show up, do the best you can do. That's been like my big life lesson from it.
Yeah, I think that the mood of an individual and in an ensemble can change things drastically. It's
Yeah.
easier if people are kind of more in the same space. Do you think do you feel like you're in that place majority of the time now, or do you ever find yourself like slipping back ever? Like you're very consciously aware, like this is what it is now.
It, I think it's a target. Sometimes you make the target, sometimes you miss the target. Um, but I always wanted to be, especially as a pianist, like I know my feeling with certain musicians when I see them come out and it's like, oh, everything is better because that person walked in the door. And, I had feelings about that with some of my favorite pianists. Like when I was at William Patterson, I was really blessed that Mulgrew Miller was my teacher. And I remember seeing him with ensembles that you could have driven a dump truck between the bass player and the drummer. I mean, it's just like super far away from each other. And he would sit down and play two chords and just boom, everything locked in, everything felt better, everybody's smiling, and it's like everything is better because Mulgrew is here. And there were so many gigs that I saw him play too that I thought like everything is better because Mulgrew was here.
Mhm.
Um, I haven't been lucky enough to know him personally, but I always had the same feeling with Kenny Barron. That like you see Kenny Barron, it's like everything is better because Kenny's here. Like everything feels better. Like this is a special person. And and that's always the piano player that I wanted to be. I don't know if that's what I am, but I know that that's my wish is that, you know, I don't want to be the person that shows up in the bandstand and is like, "Ah, that guy's a drag. He's got such a bad attitude," or like his comping gets in my way, or it's just showboating like that. For me, it's more about I want to be the person that makes everybody else sound good. That's that's been my wish and dream for forever, really.
Yeah, I mean, do you find yourself, you said you got to study with Mulgrew,
Mhm.
and he was a master musician. Do you still think about those times you had with him and reflect on them and anything?
Every day,
Yeah,
every day.
wow.
Um, I mean, it's kind of bizarre because I think in some ways, I mean, Mulgrew was such a role model on so many levels. And for me, as a very green kid coming out of Pennsylvania, and having that be like the first heavy name pianist that I really interacted with on a very deep, personal one-on-one level, um, I was really lucky because Mulgrew, it wasn't just a great musician thing. It was a great human
I
thing.
heard he was the nicest guy. I didn't know him, but I heard he was just
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I heard him say anything bad about anybody. And looking back, I can see certain things like mentioning, "Oh, I checked out this pianist," and I won't give any juicy names or anything, but him saying, "Well, he can play, but that's not as much my thing," and realizing like that's the closest you're gonna get to Mulgrew Miller saying something bad about somebody,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I I wish I was that perfect.
Well,
We're
we're
all
only
we're
we're
all
only
human.
human. We forget, we're not, we're not like, monks in a sense, and
Yeah, yeah.
but there, I do always think that there needs to be more of that going on, like, and I think a lot of it has to do with like there's just different genres within jazz. There's people who play bebop. There's people who play like organ trio, more like grooved. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like just everyone does
Yeah.
like that's the beauty of it. You don't have to say someone else is better than the other, you know?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And Mulgrew had such this beautiful way of interacting with jazz history where, I hear some people I'm teaching now at a conservatory in the Netherlands in Maastricht. And I noticed that it's, dealing with the history of this music is really complicated for a lot of people. There's a thing where it feels like, well, I have to play bebop or I have to do this, all of these have tos that come out. And
That could really mess with
somehow,
somebody too, you know? That could like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And being around Mulgrew, there was just such this beautiful relationship with the history of like there was never the pressure to check out the one thing. There was never the pressure to be like, well, it's got to be Bud Powell or bust. It was like, but Bud Powell is like the best pianist that lived, but Wynton Kelly is the best pianist that lived, and Red Garland is the best pianist that lived, and McCoy Tyner is the best pianist that like. There was just this abundance of love for so much across all of this history, which really helped me not sort of judge things in a, like I don't really I if somebody said what are your five favorite pianists, I don't think I could make a list because there are things that it's like, well, at this time this person has really got me excited about this. And that was something that Mulgrew really worked hard to pass on was to make sure that, you're not stuck on that one pianist and I only listen to these five jazz records. It's like there's this whole continuum and this whole history is really special all the way back to the very first recordings to stuff that came out 2 days ago that I think sometimes gets missed. You know,
Yeah,
sometimes
jazz
we
is
we
a living,
go,
breathing art form.
yeah, yeah. But to be around somebody that could talk about, Art Blakey, but really tell you honest to goodness stories, but share like this is what I learned from Art Blakey.
Mm,
Um, Mulgrew talked once about I had one ensemble where students didn't show up a lot, so it would just be Mulgrew and I, and he would bring a ride cymbal, and he had a great ride cymbal. Like it sounded amazing. And I think Rodney Green had given it to him as a present, but
hmm
like the way that his ride cymbal felt was amazing. So he'd be like, play. And then Mulgrew would play time with me. And he mentioned at one point, I wish I had a recording of him talking about it, where he was saying that getting bored with Tony and playing ride cymbal with Tony, and another time like hanging with um with Blakey and getting bored with Blakey and playing ride cymbal with Blakey.
mm.
Um, and just the way that he looked at everything. A group of us once asked him like, "Well, how do you deal with a drummer that's playing too loud?" And he was like, "Well, I never really played with a drummer that played too loud." And we're like, "But what about the videos of Tony with the yellow drums?" And it's just like, and Blakey and one of us in the group mentioned that. He's like, "Oh no, 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 they played full. They didn't play loud. They played full."
Ah,
And that was like yeah, it's about the sound of the drums, not, if it's a harsh sound, then yeah, it gets loud. If it's there were just so many little lessons like that that I still think about every day that he was a teacher that I'm still learning from things that he said that I'd walked out of a lesson and be like, what the hell did that mean?
yeah,
And it's just a really beautiful guy.
yeah. No, Billy, this has been great. I mean, this is such a great conversation. We're gonna have to do it again. And
Yeah.
where can everybody find your, social media and all that stuff if they want to follow you and where?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active these days. It's Billy Test Music. I have a website, billytest.com, and that's got links to all my stuff with Bandcamp, and I'm findable on Spotify and all that stuff. I'm no longer active on Twitter. I took that down, got out of there pretty quick.
No more Twitter or
Um,
MySpace.
yeah. And I am on Facebook too.
Awesome.
But yeah,
Yeah, thanks so much, man.
yeah, yeah. I hope it was helpful. This is fun.